You're listening to Explore by the Cycling Podcast, brought to you by iWOCA. Flexible loans built for small businesses. iwoca.co.uk.
Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Explore. My name is Lionel Birnie and I'm joined by Hannah Troop. We're on the phone, of course, Hannah, because we are all in isolation. Whereabouts in the world are you, Hannah?
Hi, Lionel. I am in Barcelona, so we are going into week 4 of lockdown. So there has not been any bike riding around here for quite some time, unfortunately, at the moment. But we're all doing good.
The involuntary sigh as you mentioned how many weeks of lockdown. I think we've got that to come here. We're a little bit behind you here in the UK. Yeah, we're still allowed to go out for a bike ride, but I haven't actually taken that opportunity up. Just I don't really feel like it's a risk that I want to take at the moment. So I'm sticking to riding indoors on the turbo trainer.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it? I think that, obviously here in Spain we have no choice. We're not allowed to go out of the house apart from to go and buy food or to get medical supplies. So it is kind of real true lockdown. So I have been doing many hours on a turbo trainer, which has been a sanity saver, I have to say.
Well, this is a challenge that we hadn't anticipated, isn't it? We're making a series about adventure cycling and bikepacking while many of us are unable to go out of the house even because of the coronavirus. Of course, international travel is, well, for the purposes of going cycling, is a no-no in almost the entire world at the moment, isn't it? So it's going to be a tricky few months, but Explore will continue. We've got loads of different stories that we can tell. And in this second episode of 2020, we'll hear from a man who, like you, Hannah, is doing an awful lot of riding indoors. He's actually riding the distance of the Tour de France in his flat. More from him shortly. We'll also hear the latest instalment from Ian Boswell, the former Team Sky and Katusha pro rider, who had been planning an alternative season of off-road events, was looking forward to getting out and about across the United States and the rest of the world, taking part in events which were new for him. But he too is restricted in his movements. But the main feature in this episode will look at the legendary Three Peaks cyclocross event in Yorkshire. The founder and first winner of the event, John Rawnsley, passed away over Christmas, and it was one of the events that was on my list to look at in the new revived series of Explore. And in this episode we will hear from 3-time winner Nick Craig, Simon Scarsbrook, an old colleague of mine who's ridden the event 21 times and just can't not go back each year, and also Lachlan Morton of EF Pro Cycling, who rode the event last year as part of EF Pro Cycling and Rafa's alternative calendar initiative. But first, we'll start with a story that really made me sit up and take notice last week, which is that a man called Jacob Hill-Gowing is riding the distance of the Tour de France, 3,500 kilometres, to raise money for a very good cause, The Big Issue, which for those who don't know is a magazine that's sold by homeless people, with half of the money going to the seller and half of the money going to the magazine to support other causes which help homeless people. Now, Jacob, well, we'll hear from him why he decided to undertake this crazy challenge, but he is riding on quite an unusual bike. When I first heard that this was his initiative, his way of trying to raise some money, I thought, well, he must have a smart trainer and be, doing it in relative comfort. Oh no. Let's hear from Jacob Hill-Gowing about his incredible ride.
It's literally the kind of exercise bike that your mum would have, and it was the only thing that I kind of got in my flat which I thought I could do something with and turn it into a way to kind of help out the big issue without leaving the house. Well, basically, there was kind of a call to action the other week from the Big Issue, because a lot of their street vendors, well, all of their street vendors are basically being taken off the streets because it's not safe for them to be selling the magazine. And as part of that, they ask people to subscribe for 3 months and to donate. And I kind of signed up to subscribe because I'm good friends with a bigger shoe seller who works out front of our office, a guy named Stevie, just as a way to support him. But then I figured, is there anything else more I can do? And I was kind of thinking, and then I realised I've got this old exercise bike in the flat that I've been using as a clothes horse for like the past 3 years. So I figured I'd dust that off and, cycle the length of the Tour de France, because it can't be that far. A lot of my friends started offering up donations, and I got this Just Giving page going. And it wasn't until I actually started that I realised that the Tour de France is actually 3,500 kilometres, which is quite an oversight on my part. I'm literally counting every last centimetre on this. So it's now day 7 of the Tour de Flat, and we're doing pretty well. We've raised almost £2,000 for the Big Issue Foundation, and that money will go to helping street vendors that can't work because of the coronavirus. We've got about 300 kilometres under our belt so far. Obviously I'm on the bike now, so we'll add this ride to the weekly tally, and it's going all right. After having, not really ridden a bike in about 5 years, it's going all right. We've been doing about 50k a day, and we had a bit of scare earlier in the week when I twisted my ankle, but, we strapped it up, I iced it up, and just got on with it, really. So here's to the next 3,200 kilometres on this bike. So when I first started doing it, I planned it around the idea that we were going to be on lockdown for 12 weeks. I think that was a number that was bandied about when it first came out. So I kind of took that number, divided 3,500 by that, and it came out about 42 kilometres a day. Now, kind of, if I keep going at the pace I'm going at, I'm hoping to finish before the 22nd of May, which would be about 2.5 months. But I don't know. I mean, my aim was to do 300 kilometres a week, and I did 360 something or something like that in 7 days. So hopefully, as it goes on, my stamina will increase, my fitness will increase, and I'll be able to do more and more each day. So it is a long time on the bike, and I think I worked it out. It's going to be well over 150 hours on the bike by the time I finished. I have thought about rest days, but at the minute, what I think will just, if I do have a rest day, it'll be like a 20 kilometre day or something like that. I think just because of the enormous distance that I've got to cover, and obviously not a professional cyclist and not going at the speed that they do and not on the bike for as long as they are. It's just to get it down and keep it manageable. I'm going to have to cycle without rests, as you would rest in as you traditionally would. So I've been listening to music. I was listening to music when I was doing 2-hour rides, and that was fine. But then anything over 2 hours, it kind of does get really monotonous. So I've been watching films. Luckily, I've got a good group of friends who've been texting me and stuff like that and pushing me on as I'm riding, and they're watching me on Twitch, because obviously I'm live streaming it so that people can see that I am participating in this. It's quite difficult to prove otherwise, and obviously put it on an Instagram. The mixture of kind of interacting with people while I'm on the bike and watching movies and listening to music is kind of getting me through it. I'd say, I'm just a bit of a numpty that's jumped in foot first, as I normally do, into something, and I'm just going with it, really.
Well, Hannah, my respect for Jacob there. is, well, it went up over the course of our conversation when he described his exercise bike as the sort of thing that his mum might buy from Argos. He then sent me a picture of the exercise bike, and he really is not joking. We'll post that picture on Twitter and Instagram so people can see exactly what we're talking about. But it's the most basic exercise bike, not the sort of thing that I would want to spend what could possibly be 150 hours in the saddle on. So fair play to him. As we speak, he's raised 75% of his target, coming up to £4,000 raised towards a target of 5,000. It'd be great if he could really smash that target. He's still got quite a long way to go, closing in, I think, now on around the 900 kilometre mark as we speak. So over the coming weeks, it's still got quite a long way to go. I guess the question is, will his finish line come before lockdown is released?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's kind of going into an event and you don't know how many kilometres it is before you sign up to it is quite it's quite an incredible thing to do. Crazy potentially as well. Like I said to you before, Lionel, I think by the end of it he should probably have a chamois cream sponsor, because I can imagine he might need quite a bit of it on that bike. It looks horrendous to ride it on.
Well, after we'd recorded our little interview, I did recommend that he use something to keep chafing down to a minimum. I don't know what could you use at the moment if you can't get your hands on a chamois cream. Butter, cream cheese, not sure. I mean, neither sound terribly appealing. Vaseline, of course, that would be the logical thing to use.
That would definitely be my go-to before cream cheese, I would say.
But you say that about not knowing the scale of the task that he was undertaking. I found that really fascinating. The kind of, I'll ride the distance of the Tour de France. By the way, how far is the Tour de France? Oh, it's 3,500 kilometres. In a way, this again harks back to one of those sort of the spirits of original racing that people often sort of think about. You know, could we have a stage race where the riders don't know how far they've got to go each day? That's often held up as a way to kind of reinvigorate the racing if everyone set off and didn't know where they were going or how far they were going to be expected to ride for. It's sort of what Jacob's done, really. But I wish him tremendous success. I'm keeping in touch with him, and we'll retweet him every now and again on @cycling_podcast so people can keep an eye on how he's doing. And if you do want to follow his exploits, you can find him on Twitter and Instagram. His account is Le Tour de Flat. And if you want to sponsor him, it's justgiving.com/le-tour-de-flat. And, a great cause that he's raising money for. Now, shall we hear from Ian Boswell, whose season has been dramatically rewritten for him? Not quite sure what he'll be able to ride over the course of the year, but just as we are, Hannah, Ian has pledged to keep up the updates, and this is his latest instalment.
Hello.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Lionel. How's it going?
It's good. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Just, adapting to new times.
Very much so. Very strange to be making a podcast about exploring the world on two wheels when we really can't go very far. Can you get out at all where you are?
I'm at my home in Vermont, and we are able to get out and ride. I personally have not been riding outside. I've been, kind of changed my schedule around a bit. So I've been increasing my time at work and mainly just sticking to riding indoors for the moment.
How do you find that? Was that something you enjoyed when you were racing as a professional on the road? It's kind of a job of work, isn't it? Turbo training?
It is. But, obviously with the technology now, and I'm working for Wahoo, who produces indoor hardware, so I'm fortunate to have some very nice equipment at home. But it's something that I've kind of adapted to over the last couple of years of my life. Living in Vermont, I do a lot of training indoor in the winters, and something that I have done for a couple of years now. So it's become less of a strain, and you kind of definitely develop routines and habits. And while I never do 4 or 5 hours at one go on my indoor setup, I splitting up a day or doing a couple sessions throughout the day is not terrible. And I also for the moment have just been sticking to usually 60 to 90 minute rides indoors. And
no idea really when you'll be able to resume riding properly outdoors where you are?
No. obviously this year I've walked away from professional road racing and, diving into gravel, which here in the US, all the races for the foreseeable future have been, either canceled or postponed, and still waiting to kind of see how, as everyone is, what the rest of the season looks like.
And how about your regular segment for our podcast, Explore? I mean, this feels like going back in time to another world, really, because, life was so different just a month or 6 weeks or so ago.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, and it's kind of constantly changing, and we're going to listen to the segment with Fritz. That was at a time when everything was the calendar was clear and I knew what I was doing, and everyone was going about life relatively normal. And a lot has changed, and it kind of continually changes. We're, throwing darts at a board that, is being shifted left and right, and no one really knows what's coming and what, how all of our lives are going to change when we come out of this. So
tell us who your friend Fritz is.
Yeah, so my friend Fritz is a lifelong Vermonter. I met him randomly on a ride, and he's become my number one riding partner here in Vermont. In many ways, we're unlikely companions. He's an older gentleman, and I'm obviously 29 now, but came from a world of professional sports, and he came from a world of dairy farming and very much a working man, and fell in love with cycling. And we've definitely hit off a friendship that is mutually beneficial in many ways, whether it's cycling or projects around my house, learning from him and his experience living in this part of the US.
Well, let's get to know your friend Fritz. Over to your package. When you went out riding back in a world that was very different to the one we're experiencing today.
It's 6 a.m. on a Saturday. I'm waking up and heading up to Kingdom Trails in northeastern Vermont for a fat bike ride with a couple friends, but most in particularly my good friend Fritz Fay. And it dawned on me the other day that 12 months ago I was in Nice. At this point in January, I was kind of stuck in a battle between myself and Michael Volgren of who could do the most hours for the year. And we'd oftentimes finish our ride up in La Turbie above Nice, and he would go back to Monaco and I would go back to Nice. And I noticed that I would always add a little bit and try to get, an extra 20, 30, 40 minutes just to try to get ahead of Volgren. And I wasn't really catching him, and I started to realize that he was doing the same thing. He was going out and adding a little extra training after our supposed, end of training ride. And I started to realize that, hey, we're in this pretty competitive battle for Strava time overall for the year, that eventually I think Volgren kind of admitted that was the end of his, or a turning point in his season, that kind of, he had done too much. I don't want to say I'm responsible for it, but our little battle probably wasn't the best for either of us at the time. 12 months later, I'm here in Vermont, and I'm going biking, fat biking today. It's 20 degrees Fahrenheit out, which is probably -4 Celsius. So the fat biking condition should be good. And I'm heading out with my good friend Fritz Fay. And Fritz is I don't want to get this wrong, but I think he's 59 years old. And he is my new training buddy. I met Fritz not that long after I moved to Vermont. I was out riding, and I don't see too many road cyclists, and I actually saw this guy road riding, and he looked relatively serious, so I actually flipped a U-turn and caught up to him and started riding with him. And at the time I was in my Team Sky kit, and kind of rode along next to him and started talking, and he asked me what I did for a living, and I said, I'm a cyclist. And I think he was pretty surprised that I was a professional cyclist, and I was on Team Sky, and I just come back from Tour California. And Fritz and I's relationship has really grown from there. And, we're two somewhat unlikely characters that have come together. And, to be honest, he's probably my best friend in the state of Vermont right now. We ride together. I would say of the rides I've done in January, probably 60-70% of my rides I've ridden with Fritz. But most days I get kitted up to head outside, I message Fritz and say, hey, can you, swing a long lunch break, or can you take some time off work and can we ride? And just the contrast of training with, a World Tour Pro last year to training with my friend Fritz, who, to be honest, is a pretty darn good cyclist for his age, and given that he's got a full-time job and 2 daughters who are still in school. And so today I'm going to get a little recording of Fritz on our drive up to the Kingdom Trails to fat bike.
Alrighty, it's 7:25 now. I'm in the car with Fritz. We're heading up to Lyndonville to meet up with some other friends for a fat bike ride. And I did a quick little introduction at my house this morning, Fritz, so kind of explained our relationship, how we met, kind of a little bit of your background. You grew up in Vermont. You dairy farmed for a good portion of your life. When did you actually start cycling kind of in the capacity that you cycle now, with more serious training and kind of participating in events and exploring? And
about when I was 47, I had taken it more seriously. I bought a mountain bike for my 45th birthday. I was allowed to pick out a mountain bike because I lived near Kingdom Trails, and I kind of had an interest in that, and I had put on a fair amount of weight. And I was enjoying mountain biking, but to stretch out the season, I bought a used road bike, not expecting to use it much, but just for the shoulder seasons when I couldn't be on muddy trails. And then I liked that so much that within a couple years, I was looking at local races around, ended up doing hill climb races, and from there kind of started riding on dirt roads just for variety at first, and then started really like gravel riding.
Well, we do have a lot of dirt roads here in Vermont, and like you said, you've participated in some hill climb series, some road races, and this summer you're going to be heading out to my hometown of Bend, Oregon, for an event called Oregon Trail, which is a 5-day point-to-point gravel stage race. And you've decided to come out with me and to join frontiersmen heading west. What are you looking forward to for an event that's that long? You've never done a stage race before. What are you looking forward to, and what are you scared of participating in an event like that?
Well, it's definitely a stretch for my fitness and from anything I've done before, but I am going to turn 60 this year, and just with the randomness of life and all, I don't know how many chances I'll have to do this, and things just happen to line up. I saw this. I was looking for gravel events online out west because I have adult kids out there in Colorado. Was looking more in that area. But when I saw the Oregon Trail gravel race, something about it just really appealed to me. It's sort of like bikepacking, but you don't have to carry anything. You just ride your bike hard for a long, long time.
I'm coming from a background of road racing, which is pretty limited in the sense where if I'm on my bike, I want to ride pretty hard and pretty focused. I'm slowly veering away from that, but it seems there's definitely been many rides together that you want to go on the most beaten path, or the most unbeaten path, sorry. You love exploring new roads and the challenge. What do you think in you, makes you want to have that struggle? Is that something you think came from, dairy farming and growing up in Vermont in a pretty rural lifestyle where you love the, I don't say epic, but you love the struggle and you love the challenge of it?
I don't know why. I remember riding with you once, Ian, when we didn't know each other very well, and you were asking me which way I wanted to go back, and we had several intersections where there was a choice, and we could have just cruised home on pavement, and I was used to my route and was kind of showing you roads, so I just headed up the hill on the gravel road, and eventually you said, "You don't take the easy way out, do you?" And I said, "No, I like to be exhausted when I get back." So, and I don't really know where it came from. I will say that growing up on a farm, not a complaint at all, but I wasn't very exposed to things, and I really liked athletic stuff and just couldn't do it as a kid. It wasn't really in our DNA as a family to participate in school sports, and I think I've always seen myself as an athlete, even though I didn't get to do it when I was young, and I'm kind of making up for it while I can.
Yeah, well, I noticed there's a lot of people in this area that, their workout is working on the farm, and you don't have the energy at the end of the day to go out for a bike ride. because that's kind of wasted energy that you could be putting towards your animals or your land. You said you didn't really start riding until your late 40s. I mean, I don't think you have any regrets riding. You always say that after every ride, regardless of conditions, regardless of what happens, you're always happy to do it.
I didn't come to cycling from a love of it already. I really grew into it, just looking for some way to get some exercise, and Kingdom Trails was nearby, and that kind of put that idea in my mind. But it became a real mental health helper for me. It just really became I don't meditate or do a lot of active mental health exercises, but whatever, I've had the same challenges everybody's had in life. It hasn't all been easy, and a lot of time on the bike has really helped my mind, and I have never regretted a bike ride. And it's a struggle to get out sometimes, but I'm always happy I did it.
Well, it's 4 p.m. and I'm finally back home from my ride with Fritz and our other two friends, and we had a blast out there. Turns out that riding on snow is very different than riding on pavement, and it's very different than riding on many of the gravel roads. It was slippery, a little bit soft in a few places. It definitely tested my patience a few times. Oftentimes I feel like cycling should be a lot of pedaling and not walking, and we wound up doing not a lot of walking, but we definitely had to trudge up a few steep hills. It goes to show that there are so many different facets to this sport, and while you can be physically strong, that doesn't always correlate to being fast. And the other two riders we were with were definitely more skilled mountain bike, fat bike riders than us. Turns out a 400-watt threshold and surging power up a little steep climb leads you to a lot of lost traction. So anyways, hope you all enjoyed. Thank you. Ian Boswell, over and out.
Well, Ian, that was a really charming little audio adventure. Made me feel quite wistful about the outdoors, and I suppose reminded me of what we're trying to do with this series of Explore, which is just to celebrate the simple pleasure of riding a bicycle, whether you're going to go a long way or what is a long way for each individual. I mean, one person's 100-mile ride is another person's 50-mile ride, isn't it? Everything is relative, and just that sense of freedom, the freedom to just explore and decide whether to go left or right or straight on. And while we're all to varying degrees experiencing this kind of loss of freedom, it makes me yearn really for the days when we can just go outside without a second thought. And those days will return, of course. We have to be optimistic, but it's kind of put me back in touch with what it is to go out and experience the world on a bicycle.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, we've all taken a lot of perspective from this and the freedom and kind of luxury we did have, before this, crisis. And, like you said, it will return. And I think for a lot of people, we will, return to our lives that we had before with much more, gratitude for what we're able to do and the freedom to get out and ride and socialize and be with people, because it's something we all miss. And, it's an incredibly difficult time for so many people, but it's something in many ways a reminder of how fortunate we are to be able to get out on our bikes and explore. And I've already been mapping out rides that I want to do when I am getting back outdoors.
And that simple thing, friendship, just being with somebody else and talking about the world and sharing the great outdoors, it's so easy to take for granted, I think.
Definitely, and throughout my cycling career, that's probably one of the things I'm realizing that I miss most about riding my bike is the social aspect to it. I love exercise and I love getting outside and, wind in your face, but it's really the conversations that you have on a bike. And that's something that, the best conversations in my life have taken place while out riding. And I'm definitely missing that, but, looking forward to getting back out there when the coast is clear to ride again.
Well, you're going to have to let us know in due course what's going to come up in your segment for Explore, because obviously all of your objectives have changed, and your entire calendar, I guess, is completely, on hold at the moment.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know what's coming up like most of us, but I'll find something to rustle up for another contribution to the podcast, and it's something I really enjoy, and I love picking my brain and trying to find interesting people or interesting topics to talk about.
You're listening to Explore by the Cycling Podcast, brought to you by iWalker. Flexible loans built for small businesses. If you run a business, find out more at iWalker.co.uk, iwoca.co.uk.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by iWalker, and it's thanks to their support that we were able to relaunch Explore as a monthly show earlier this season. iWalker was founded to support small businesses with a mission to provide finance that companies need, not in weeks, but within hours of a loan application being made. These are extraordinary times for everyone, including small businesses, and iWalker is working with the government to help ensure that small businesses are able to get through this period of uncertainty. iWalker is working with the British Business Bank in order to become accredited for the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. You can read more about the scheme on iWalker's website at iwoca.co.uk. That's iwoca.co.uk. Now, Hannah, one event that you can't replicate indoors is the Three Peaks Cyclocross. I know you've done a bit of cyclocross. Have you ever fancied riding the Three Peaks?
I know some friends who have ridden it, and they've done it for quite a few years now, and they absolutely love it. They say it's one of the best events that they do all year. So I wouldn't mind giving it a go, but then after speaking to Lachlan about it, I was like, whoa, it sounds really tough, like crazy tough. So, but it sounds like it's got a good atmosphere around it.
Well, it's obviously one of those events that gets under people's skin. One of the other people we're going to hear from, Simon Scarsbrook, a former colleague of mine at Cycling Weekly magazine, a very talented graphic artist who actually drew the covers of our book series, The Cycling Anthology, edited by Ellis Bacon and myself a few years ago, and a very accomplished cyclocross rider. He's ridden 21 times, and that just gives you an indication of what it is to just be drawn back to the same event. We'll also hear from Nick Craig, a 3-time winner, who's had a rivalry in recent years with Rob Jebb, who's got a record 12 wins. And we'll hear a little bit about their rivalry and what it is about the event that appeals to Nick Craig. Of course, very fine mountain bike rider, also rode the Olympic Games road race for Great Britain in Sydney in 2000, was called up at short notice to take a place in the road race and rode the first hour or two, rode it in mountain bike shoes actually, on domestique duties for Max Chiandri. And as you said, Hannah, you spoke to Lachlan Morton of EF Pro Cycling, as the team is now, EF Education First, as they were last year when Lachlan rode the Three Peaks Cyclocross and finished 4th. Really impressive result as a first-timer, very different to racing at World Tour level on the road, completely different type of event, of course, to Three Peaks. And, this was an event that caught my eye back when I first started working for Cycling Weekly. It always threw up the most iconic photos of the year, really. The snaking line of riders all walking, hiking really, with their bikes on their shoulders up Simon Fell. That's probably the picture. If you've seen a picture of the Three Peaks, that's probably the one that you've seen. And it tackles the Three Peaks, Ingleborough, Whernside and Pen y Ghent. And the race founder, John Rawnsley, passed away at Christmas, aged 81. And a man after my own heart in a way, because he created the event and won the first edition. That's always been my ambition, create a cycling event and be able to win the first edition. I suppose I did it as a child, Hannah. I founded the Tour de Kings Langley that me and 2 friends rode during a half-term holiday when I was about 10 or 11. I had the advantage of knowing the course because I designed the course, and I also, I rigged it so that I was the winner. So I'm not sure where this is going, but I do love the idea. How many editions is that
race into now, Lionel?
There was a bit of a sulk at the end, and And that was the first and only edition of the Tour de Kings Langley, unfortunately.
Even better, if you can win the only one and the first one.
I fear that lockdown is forcing me or persuading me to reveal a bit more about my character than perhaps is ideal. But John Rawnsley went on to ride the event 45 times in all. He organised it for 50 years before handing over to a committee to carry on. And the event will continue. It's only not been held a couple of times because of an outbreak of foot and mouth in the area. That was in 2001 and 2007. We don't at the moment know, of course, whether the event will be able to be held this September, but it's an event that's just really captured the imagination of people. And, well, let's hear from our three interviewees about the event. The first voice you're going to hear in this little package is actually John Rawnsley, and I must say a big thank you to Benedict Campbell for letting us use this little bit of audio. It comes from his film For the Love of Mud. More about that in a little while.
Well, it had been cycled by a 14-year-old schoolboy as a challenge ride, and then my cycling club decided to have a go, and then the year after we launched the race and had that beautiful trophy, Carl's Trophy given, and it's gone on ever since 1961.
And how many times did you race it?
45.
I feel lucky to be able to do it. It's a mad race, but it's always kept me sane because it's given me something to aim for each year. And when I've been ill and when I've been injured, I've always had it in the back of my mind that that's on the horizon. And it does keep you going. It does keep you alive, really. Hello, I'm Simon Scarsbrook. I've ridden the Three Peaks 21 times and hopefully more so too.
You need to almost do one to win one. I probably would eat my words if Mathieu van der Poel turned up at the Three Peaks, because I think he would just win one if he did it, obviously. I'm Nick Craig. I've been lucky enough to have a career that's allowed me to pedal for a living for quite a long time. I'm now nearly 51 and I still love racing the Three Peaks, an event that I've won 3 times.
The Three Peaks cyclocross is probably the most ridiculous bike race in the world, maybe. You're never on the right bike. Basically, you run over these Three Peaks in Yorkshire, and it's like when you're on the uphill, you don't want any bike because it's so steep. You got to run with it. On the downhills, you want like a dual suspension mountain bike, and then on the road, you want a road bike. My name's Lachlan Morton. I ride for EF Pro Cycling.
It's an oddity, really, because it's billed as a cyclocross, but I guess it is. Cyclocross is probably the nearest description to what it is, but it's basically a race over 3 peaks, which are billed as mountains because I think each one is over 1,000 feet. There's road sections in between, but there's a lot of carrying and descending. It takes place in the Yorkshire Dales. The 3 mountains are Ingleborough, Whernside and Pen-y-Ghent. Each peak, you're basically half the time you're riding, half the time you're walking, stroke running. The field nowadays is about 600. 600 is sort of the limit, but apparently they have up to 1,000 people will apply to race. I think the first event had about 50 riders, and it's just risen from there really every year. The first event was 1961, and it was almost like a club event. It was just sort of word of mouth. It was the best Yorkshire cyclocross riders that rode it, so it was a proper full-on race, and it was won by John Rawnsley. But, normal cyclocross, it's all about getting away quick and getting the best route, getting the best line, and it is like that. You line up nowadays with 500 other people, and you think you're near the front when you're lining up. They seed it, so the top riders will be at the front. And you think, well, I'm quite near the front here, but the minute you get out on the road, you realise, no, hang on a minute, you're sort of 300 riders back. And the first part is a neutralised section through something out that lasts for the summer wine, through all those little villages and humpback bridges and round pubs and things like that. And you're behind a car which is gradually speeding up. And so the front guys are on the bumper of the car and you're struggling to stay on the wheel for the first 6 kilometres. And that's neutralised, but it's doing like 30 miles an hour down the road. And it is like a fight to get a good position. And then it all sort of goes quiet. The car stops, you're out on the moors, and you realise, hang on a minute, I'm a bit far back here, I've got to sort of make my way up. And it is like in a funny way, it's like an hour-long cyclocross, but spread over 4 hours. Everything you think about in a cyclocross is there over those 4 hours.
On paper, if you look at the profile of the event, you would say it's not that hard. It's got a really good portion of road on it. You can see how long the bits that you'll have to walk. On paper, you'd probably say that's not too difficult. And the ascent of Ingleborough and the ascent of Whernside are both very, very difficult for a bike rider. And that's because the first one, when you go up Ingleborough, you go up a fell called Simon Fell. And this is an area where you can't pre-ride it. The only way to go up Simon Fell is to do the race, because it's special permission that the organisers got from the farmer. And the only way to describe it, and it's the picture that everybody sees, is the snaked line of competitors where they're pulling the grass, and literally it's that steep that your calf muscles are screaming. When you get to the top of Simon Fell, I know a lot of people would say at that point, I can't do this, I'm finished. And I always encourage people just to say, get on your bike, pedal a bit, go over the top of Ingleborough, then you're going to ride all the way on the road to Whernside. And when you get to Whernside, the same calf muscles that were almost torn apart on the first one are really stretched. And usually you find that things get a little bit easier from there.
Yeah, knowing the course is huge because it's quite confusing as to where you're actually racing, which way you're trying to go, because some parts of you're in a giant field and you can go anyway, but if you're in the know, it might be like you move all the way to the right where it's a bit drier. Or the same thing goes for the descents. I look at it, well, when I was sort of descending and looking at it, you'd see big rocks and you'd be like, oh, okay, there's lots of rocks here. But then someone would come flying past you at 50k an hour and they know that was, the only rock. I mean, I think that's what makes the race so interesting, is that you really have to have a knowledge of the terrain and just the area and understanding the landscapes, and that really plays an advantage, which I think is super interesting, because there's not many other races where that hometown advantage is so beneficial.
I think you need to be a very good descender. I think that you can't teach that. It's a really strange thing because historically the fell runners, the people who can fell run and descend well and descend fast are the people who are going to be the winners. You can gain time going up if you are fast, but if you take it too hard, it's easy to tire yourself. So like a lot of people will do a fast walk rather than a run. The top guys, people like Rob Jebb, will actually run. They have a very short step fell running technique. But going down is when you lose and gain time. You might gain 5 minutes going up, but you will lose 10 minutes going down if you're not a good descender. For me, you see people at the start who you're riding with in the neutralised section, and then 2 hours later you're still with them. People will come and go, but there'll be like a core of riders who are sort of around the same level as you, who will be with you. And that's quite good in a way, because you have these little private races within the race. Up the front there is it's the same, I think. There's within certain time frames there's a lot of fluidity. People will be good descenders, people will be good climbers. I've always been quite good at going uphill, and I think I'm above average at going downhill, but not super fast. I always come a cropper if I try and go too fast, it seems. So, but yeah, there's a lot of fluidity amongst the race, but not on a large scale. No one is going to come from last place on the first one and suddenly be first place on the last one. But for instance, the descent of Whernside, the second one, was back in the day. It used to be very swampy and marshy, and they laid, for the purpose for walkers, they laid front doors all in a row on various parts of the path so people wouldn't step in the bog, and they were all painted gloss. And so we rode down the descent onto these gloss painted doors, and the door handles were still there and the letterboxes, and it was a nightmare. It was sort of slip sliding around. They also had, on the swamp, they also had sort of Hessian sheets, so if someone fell off the doors onto the swamp, they wouldn't go under the water. It's a very strange. A friend of mine was shooting down the door, and he fell off the door on his bike and went under the Hessian sheet, and he sort of emerged underneath. And I don't think he finished that day. I think it scared the life out of him. I don't think he came back either after that. Nowadays, there's lots of slabs there, and it's just as dangerous. There's sort of these slab steps made for walking, and you can ride down this sort of staircase, which, if it's wet, is just as dodgy.
My history goes back to the 70s, and my dad decided that he was going to go back to a sport that he did before he got married and before he had a family. So my dad had previously won the Three Peaks in the third edition, 1963, racing for the Loon Road Club, and he basically got me, I think I was 9. He started racing cyclocross, and I went along with him, and I watched him do the Three Peaks. So for those early years, so 79 through to 85, I started to be able to support my dad by, being in the right place with a drink or a pair of wheels or just some encouragement. And I got inspired. I was 16 when I first rode it. If you're that age now, you wouldn't be able to ride it. You can ride it in your second year as a junior. So depending on when you're born, you could be 17 or 18 now when you first ride it. But I was 16, and I rode. I can't remember the sort of positions I came. I was probably around the 50s or something like that. And I don't want to say it was harder then, because that's not really, we can all go, oh, it's a lot tougher when we did it and all the rest of it. But what has changed with the Three Peaks is all the erosion control. It's become a lot more rideable than it used to be. So I can remember climbing up Whernside. You used to go up Whernside, and you used to turn around at the top and come back down again. And you had to climb in and out of peat bogs all the way up, and the same all the way down. So if you go up there now, there's actually a flight of steps. So there's more and more man-made gravel-style riding. Still very, very hard, and still, you're still going at the same elevation. So I suppose it's a different underfoot experience.
I think if you live up there, it's probably, it's just something you take in your stride. And that seems to be the approach of the northern riders when you see them. It's sort of like, they do it every weekend, so this time it just happens to be a race. But for the southerners, when we used to go up, you'd come back and you'd feel a little bit, special is probably not the word, but you just feel like you belong to some sort of club. And we always used to have this thing where the London leaguers, if the first London leaguer home would buy the beers. So we've got pictures of people tottering across the car park with trays of beer, hardly able to walk, but you can walk to the bar. But yeah, there's a feeling that you've achieved something, even if you've only done it once.
You need to almost do one to win one. And really interestingly, Lachlan Morton, you'll be aware, he did the EF Education Alternative Programme said this time last year that they're going to do the 3 peaks in 2019. And it was all over Twitter. Somebody asked me a question, I check it every now and again, and it was, do I think that Lachlan Morton could win the 3 peaks in 2019? I didn't know the guy. I know that he's Pro Tour. You know, I know what Pro Tour means, how big that engine is, and he's certainly an amazing bike rider, an engine, and he can do all these things. So, but straight off, without really knowing him, I just said, you need to do one to win one.
To be honest, before the race started, when I got an idea of what the course looked like, I didn't think I was going to have any chance. I was surprised with how I did. But really, like, when I hit the first descent and saw how hard these guys were sending it, I was like, Jesus, where am I going to make up time? You know, like, how am I going to bring these guys back? But luckily, the last peak it's super rideable, and it's a decent climb. And there's only one section you really need to get off if you still have good legs. So I was able to go, I think, from 12th to 4th on the last climb. As soon as it went off-road uphill at the start, I knew I was in trouble. I didn't take any spare bikes, or we didn't have any spare wheels either. So I just had a tube in the back pocket.
I actually rode past him on a pedalling section up to the top of Ingleborough and never saw him again. I know that if he'd have come past me anywhere cycling after that, he would have absolutely just ripped past me. And he went from 11th to 4th on Pennygent. I didn't see it because I was in second place chasing Rob Jebb for about 50 seconds. But yeah, if he came back with the knowledge that he's got now, what do they call it on the road? Is it cheat sheets? They call them, don't they? I think he'd have a cheat sheet now that would say, okay, show respect to Simon Feld, do this, do that. And, you know, they make, you know, I'm sure he's made mental notes, if not physical pen to paper notes of how to come back and win that race.
I mean, my heart rate was absolutely through the roof. I think I had my highest 20 or 30 minute heart rate for the year at the race. I think it's mainly because of the running stuff. I was so inefficient running that I was just blowing myself up. The second you jump off the bike there, you're sort of scrambling up a really steep sort of grass wall where it's steep enough that you sort of have your hand touching the ground in front of your face. And physically there, that was super difficult for me because I had no idea about pacing, and I was trying to run with some really good runners up there, which I paid for. So by the time you get to the end of a road section, you're quite blown, but then you're off the bike scrambling, or, you know, on the stairs, or hanging on for dear life on a downhill. So, like, the intensity is pretty close to 100% for 3 hours. There's a lot of different things you learn first time around. But I would say, like, the descents are pretty challenging if you're doing them at speed. So understanding how a cross bike handles, like, when you're really letting it go on like a rocky descent, that's important. And then also knowing how to pace yourself when you're running, because like you get off and you feel great and you have a bike on your shoulder and you're like, oh yeah, I'm cruising, and then 3 minutes later you're absolutely blown and you're halfway up a hill, and you know you've sort of jeopardized your whole race strategy because you just have no idea what running pacing is. So for me, yeah, that was big. And then knowing that you could, as a road rider, you could bring back a lot of time on that last climb. That was really important. You know, if you saved some legs there and just like kept persisting, you could pick off a lot of guys on that last hill. But the thing that sort of struck me is that, like, you know, halfway through the race, I looked around and like we're running up this hill, like in the fog. You're wearing Lycra and like you're on a cross bike, and there's no place to even have any sort of bike. So the whole thing just seemed so ridiculous, and like it made me laugh. But then you realise everyone's just taking it deadly seriously, you know, like, so it's this sort of event that should just be an absolute joke. And, you know, if they had it like in the States, it'd be one of those things where like everyone dresses up and cross dresses and like, you know, just like takes it like, you know, like a party. But there it's just deadly serious, which I think is like totally unique to that.
You know, one of the best experiences, and I have to say to Lachlan, you must make sure that you go to that building over there, which is the bunkhouse that has showers in it, and you basically walk in there with your bag, you're dripping in blood and sweat and mud, and you feel like you've been beaten up. You walk in there, and there's a set of kind of 1970s brown and orange velour couches that have been well used, absolutely battered. And there's a Yorkshireman there, and he'll just say, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And next thing, you've got a cup of tea, you've got a piece of cake or a biscuit in front of you, and you sit there with your bag and you basically wait till you're told there's a shower free. And the atmosphere in there and the banter is incredible. And I remember talking to Richard Grunendahl in there, and it's just a great, it's very, very hard to describe. I hope that kind of sums it up really, but it's the one event that you say, as soon as you cross the line, I'm not doing that again. That's it, I'm finished. And that's the general feeling. By the time people, as time passes, hours pass and days pass and weeks pass, all you hear is people say, right, it's now 11 months and 3 days to the 3 peaks, and they're already planning and hatching, how can I be fitter, stronger, better prepared and ready for the 3 peaks next year and get an entry, because that's obviously a challenge as well.
Saying something is an iconic event is easy to do, really, and putting the word classic next to it and all the rest of it, but it is really an iconic event. And he was a bit of a maverick at the time, very softly spoken to the British cycling scene. I mean, it's famous world over now. It's hard to describe really, because it's sort of, he was so quietly spoken, but you knew in the background he had everything in order. He had all the organisational talents to talk to the landowners, to keep it going, to talk to the park warden, keep it going, and it was always very friendly to outside people. And there's always this onus that it was part of the landscape, but also the people who were watching it and the passers-by and the people who lived on the route, they were all part of it and all made to feel part of it. The way it is it's borne the test of time. And maybe because John was such a maverick and he's sort of paved his own ways, made his own rules, people have come in, people have gone, but it's always been him behind it. And that's why it's where it is today, I think. It's changed with the times, the parkour has changed with the times, but there's always this thought that the reasons why it was set up and the reasoning behind why he rode it is why people ride it now. Because he's always there, it's almost like he's set this challenge, which he's doing, and it's almost like you're trying to bring yourself up to his level. And especially as a southerner, in inverted commas, you sort of wanted to be part of it, and you wanted to sort of prove that you could be at that level. And he and his friends who were riding, you just wanted to be part of it. And because he was there doing it, and you would see him, and the last peak in particular, you come down the same way you go up. So it's almost like you see everybody in the race on that last peak. So you see them at the start, the next time you see them is at the end, and while you're all racing, and there's time to sort of wave and nod, and there's a lot of sort of respect that goes on between the riders at that point, and it is that sort of feeling that you've sort of matched him and you've matched the event.
The event grew and grew and grew, and John was a lovely man from a lovely Yorkshireman with a huge passion for an amazing event. And I was lucky enough to speak to him 2 weeks before he died, and it was a really lovely opportunity to thank him for basically putting an event on that was such an inspiration to not just me but lots of people. It's a really different atmosphere to any other event that I can say I've ever done. It's not even like it's almost like, for me it can feel like a world championship, but I'm not in the environment that would be a world championship. So it's really kind of strange, and there's a real camaraderie around a feeling of achievement for everybody. And what's really strange is when I'm usually near the front end of the race, so majority of the time I guess I've been in the top 10, and when you actually finish, the event, there's nobody there, and then the support for everybody, right down to the last person that's made the final cut-off that actually gets to the finish. The atmosphere, because everyone's either eating chips, having a pint at the pub, talking about their experience, and everybody's asking how they got on. Everybody that does the Three Peaks has got a tale to tell.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport. Fueled by science.
Explore by the Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Now, we may not be able to go out for long rides outdoors at the moment, and depending on where you're listening from, you might not be able to go out for a bike ride at all. So indoor training has really come into its own lately. Now, if your experience of riding indoors is anything like mine, you'll know it can be pretty sweaty work, especially as the temperatures are starting to rise at the moment. So it's important to keep hydrated, and it's especially important to recover if you've done an intense virtual race or a really tough interval session. Science in Sport can still fuel your ride, even if your ride isn't actually taking you anywhere. And you can get 25% off all Science in Sport products at scienceinsport.com with the code SISCP25. That's SISCP25 at scienceinsport.com. Well, Hannah, I think there was a little bit of consternation that Lachlan Morton might just rock up and win at the first attempt. I think that the record winner, Rob Jebb, with his 11 titles as it was going into the 2019 edition, was mildly concerned that he might have an even stronger competitor on his hands, but Jebb came through again to win for the 12th time. It does sound, as Nick Craig was saying, like an event that favours people who really can get to know the course over several editions. And of course, because they can't go and recce all of the course, because as part of it is held on private land, local knowledge and a bit of experience goes a long way.
Yeah, I think when I spoke to Lachlan, he was in the mind before going into that race that he probably wasn't going to be able to win, just because for that very reason about the course knowledge. I like the bit where he says, where he's descending down and there's like a rock and he thinks, okay, I need to be a bit more careful because there's loads of rocks here, and then people come flying past him at 50 kilometers per hour and he's like, oh, that was the only rock. So yeah, it's incredible, obviously, once you start to get the knowledge of that course, and because it never changes as far as I know each year, you just obviously build up that knowledge, and it's kind of second to none, isn't it?
I think it has changed the order of the climbs, and little bits and pieces have changed, but the three climbs themselves, of course, haven't changed for millennia, I guess. They've certainly been around a lot longer than bicycles have, but yeah, it's a kind of it's a fixed monument to cyclocross, and I love the fact that although it's called a cyclocross race and the spirit of it is definitely cyclocross, the little bit of intrigue about the use of flat bars for a period of time, and the debates and discussions about whether that's the direction they wanted to take the event in. I just think it's something that's got such a unique character, and long may it continue. And if that has whet your appetite for a bit more on the Three Peaks cyclocross, Benedict Campbell, who I mentioned just before we heard that package, is the director of a really lovely film about cyclocross, which has a big section on the Three Peaks in it. It's called For the Love of Mud, and it's on Vimeo, and it's really worth a watch. If you go to vimeo.com/on-demand/love mud, you can find the film there. And I think during this period where we're all locked down, you can watch that film for free. So thank you very much to Benedict for allowing us just to use a few seconds of John Rawnsley's voice. I thought it was really important just to hear just a snatch of John Rawnsley's voice, just to get a flavour of the man and his event. And if you want to watch something else, of course, the EF Gone Racing film by Rafa Films is on YouTube. The Three Peaks cyclocross will be pretty easy to find. If you go to YouTube and just type in EF Gone Racing or Rafa Films, you'll come up with a whole series of the films made around last season. And I thought the Three Peaks one was actually the best of all of the films that they made last year. It really kind of brought to life the scale of the event, and I think perhaps that's also because there's a certain mystique about it. It's not something that we get to see on TV. It's not something that really benefits from a huge amount of exposure, it's still seen as a sort of a niche event, and hopefully it will retain a bit of that mystique.
Yeah, I think when I've spoken to Lachlan, he'd never really done much cycling in the UK until last year, and then he kind of went full throttle with that and GB Jura, and he said he absolutely loved the cycling over in the UK, and he said that event, like he explains in the interview, that there's a real kind of a mystique around the event, but also it's something that people are really serious about and really get into and just love being a part of. So it definitely sold it for me. I don't know when that will happen, and I hope it does run this year as long as everything goes back to normal, but it does sound like a pretty cool place.
And the camaraderie aspect of it as well, and anyone who's done a time trial or a local road race in the UK, the tradition of the cup of tea in a polystyrene cup and a slice of cake after an event, it's basically that's the sustenance for some of these events, isn't it? And it's great to hear that it's no different at a race that is as challenging and difficult as the Three Peaks.
That was very reserved of you, just mentioning a cup of tea. We all know that you'd be straight in there for a pint afterwards with them as well.
Absolutely. Well, why else ride it? I mean, why else ride it? Well, Hannah, that's the first of our lockdown editions of Explore. We're going to have to delve on into our long list of potential stories to tell over the next however many months, but we will do that. And this time next month, we'll be back with episode 3 of Explore. Maybe you could do your own version of the Tour de Flat there in Barcelona. I mean, you could definitely knock out a quick Vuelta a Catalonia, surely.
I'll come back to you on that one, but I don't think I'll need much time. It'll probably be a no. But no, I think the thing that for me, and we talked about this about the podcast and at this moment in time, I think one of the things that's kind of been keeping me going quite a bit over the last few weeks, whilst we've been here in lockdown and not being able to go out cycling, is the actual talking to some of my friends over here and the thinking about where we will go cycling once everything opens back up again, and plans for like different adventures that we'd like to go on. There's definitely been a lot of talk of getting out into some mountains at some point. So I think it's good to think ahead for when we can all get back out there again.
So where would be first on the list?
Well, I actually said, I mean, I've not done much riding in the Pyrenees. So and because we're so close to the Pyrenees here, we said that we'd go out and do some riding around there at some point. I've also started to think about loads of different climbs and rides and stuff like that. I still haven't done Ventoux, and I know it's a bit of a touristy one to go and do, but it's kind of somewhere that I would quite like to go and do as a climb as well. So but yeah, or the Dolomites or wherever. There's so many places, aren't there? There's so many places to go. So
there are. I'm craving going somewhere comfortable, comforting and familiar. Maybe it's because we've just had the weekend that should have been the Tour of Flanders, and Flanders has been on my mind, but I can think of nothing better at the moment than just taking my bike to Flanders and just riding some of the climbs there and just going along the canal path from Ghent to Oudenaarde, or the cycle path to the Oude Quademont, and then just ride up there and stopping for some frites and a beer or a hot dog. I mean, yeah, I'm kind of getting wistful thinking about that. But I think when this is all over, I probably will seek the familiar and the comfortable before exploring somewhere new. But perhaps that's just me, or perhaps that's just how I'm coping with lockdown at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's everyone's kind of dealing with it in a different kind of way, and I think that we've been talking about that first bike ride out together, which will be somewhere around Barcelona. It will be so magical. I can't even think about what it's going to feel like getting together with my friends and going out cycling again. It will definitely never be taken for granted ever again, that's for sure.
No, Watopia is fine, but Other online cycling platforms are available, of course. Well, let's wrap up this episode of Explore here, and I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to the package about the Three Peaks Cyclocross. Do check out Benedict Campbell's film and the EF Gone Racing film if you want to see a little bit more. In the meantime, Hannah, I'll speak to you before. I don't just speak to you for episodes of Explore, do I? I mean,
it's almost daily contact about
Wouldn't
what the
that-
situation
wouldn't
is
go that
like
far.
on either side of the continent. So yeah, it's we'll definitely be in touch anyway.
Well, we'll be back next month. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you, Lionel.